back again. Our first workshop this morning is Parks and Open Spaces Assets Management. So, Mike, I'll hand to you.
Thanks, Mayor Baker. Councillors, thanks for your time again this morning. This is the next in a series of three sessions we're having around our asset management. We really wanted to be really clear with you about the state of our assets, where we're going, where we're not going, so that there's no misunderstanding about what we have. You remember that we weren't that flash on this with the three waters, so we wanted to make sure that we didn't kind of go there with some of our other asset classes. So we've got a real bonus for you this morning. We've got John Callaghan here from Parks. Julian's away, unfortunately, otherwise he would be here. He apologises. But just before I hand over to John, a couple of things on Parks. So you recall with transport, a waka kotahi kind of pulls the strings and has a framework that sits over everything we do in transport. With these guys, there's a piece of legislation called the Reserves Act, which is quite prescriptive and quite difficult to navigate through, but the Reserves Act controls a whole bunch of what we can do whenever we have a reserve. We've got about 1,000 hectares of reserve land in Porirua City in about 180 different places, 180 different parks or reserves. So you can imagine there's quite a bit involved in managing those assets. And when we talk about assets in parks, a park on its own is not just an asset, right? There's a whole bunch of components to it. And if you think about a park that has a playground on it, and then you think about what the playground itself looks like with a swing, for example, and then you think about the swing and the shackle that holds the swing, and if that shackle fails and a kid breaks their arm, then there's hell to pay, right? So that's the kind of stuff that John has to think about with respect to asset condition. Where we can take a risk and stuff like shackles, we can't take any risks. Where we can take a risk, and one of the key areas that always comes up is mowing. It's what these guys do mowing, but just to be clear, not all of the assets that these guys mow are actually their assets. So a lot of our reserve land is road reserve, which is looked after by the transport team, and a lot of the land is actually waka kotahi land where we mow. So we mow it for them, and we have deals with waka kotahi around that, which is actually something that Darren and I are working through with waka kotahi at the moment. As you know, the funding in the GPS for that kind of stuff has been reduced. So thereby, we've got some choices to make about the level of service around things like mowing on waka kotahi land. So the other key thing that these guys spend a lot of time fretting about is trees. Everybody loves trees until they blow down and take out your power line. Then there's hell to pay. So there's always this balancing act we have to pay with trees and how we manage them and the criticality of trees, which trees are dangerous, and those are the ones we prioritise, and maybe John you can talk about that, but and the ones that we don't prioritise. So we worry about safety with trees, not so much around stuff like views and sunlight, that kind of stuff. So that's a level of service discussion, and John will talk about level of service a little bit shortly. So that's what I really want to say. I'll hand over to John. He's got a quick presentation, 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll open up for conversation because I'm sure there are some questions that you'd like to ask. Now, after John, we've got David in the room, and David will be talking to you about waste and Spicer landfill in particular.
So, John, do you want questions at the end then?
Oh,
okay.
That'd be good.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Kia ora koutou. Parks Asset Management. I'm just going to do a quick overview of the parks world in Porirua and the various types of assets that we manage, and then finish with some challenges and risks. What we do, we look after parks, reserves, playgrounds, cycleways, walkways, gardens, beaches, boat ramps, harbours, sports fields, courts, cemeteries, crematorium, and also land and the natural environment. So parks infrastructure is a connected network. It's just like roads and pipes, and it's providing community infrastructure. Why we do it? To provide our open spaces and parks an accessible network for our community. It's especially important as the city grows and becomes more densely populated, and we're trying to have a level of service where our parks are safe, well presented and well managed, and affordable. So we encourage our community to live a healthy lifestyle and become connected through outdoor activity and also connected to the environment. What we have, We've got a lot of assets. Got ahead of myself. 46 playgrounds, the 4 skate parks, we got dog parks, 100 k's of walkways, 11,000 amenity trees, 600 groups of trees, and 100 exotic woodlands, 7 hectares of horticultural gardens, 30 odd sports fields, 35 courts, 3 cemeteries, a crematorium, and in those parks, we've got a lot of infrastructure and assets. Examples, 1,000 culverts we manage, about 350 various structures, everything from bridges, boardwalks, jetties, boat ramps. We also manage some road, Ngāti Toa Domain being an example, car parks, hard surfaces. We've got man-made stormwater detention lakes, Whitby Lake, Cannons Creek Lake, man-made lagoons, Altair Lagoon, Kowhai Lagoon. So there's a real wide variety of assets as well as vegetation and the natural areas. Here's a Julian. Trees. We love trees and they're nature's carbon capture machines. And there's an example, this is just an example of our city, and if you look at the coloured dots up there, the yellow blues, that's street trees. On the left is the Whitby suburb, on the right's Cannons Creek and Waitangarua. It shows you the disproportionate spread of trees in some of our suburbs and cities. So we're going to have a focus, particularly the next 3 years during this LTP, of getting some more trees into the city. It's a pretty easy one to look at and see the picture there. Parks asset management. I'm sure you've all been told what asset management is, so I don't think I need to preach that one. Our AMP. I've been fortunate enough to work on the Parks AMP for the last 3 LTPs, and I believe our Parks AMP has grown and reflects growth, that reflects the level of service that our community expects at the moment. And I guess where the rubber hits the road is affordability, and that, we all know what's coming there with our costs. So we're looking at our asset management plan. If you look at that pie graph, I've generalised the assets. Most of our assets are in average condition, as you can see there, about 65%, and a small percentage very poor and poor. That's right across a huge range of assets and a whole range of risks. Where the risks are high, obviously we're much more focused on making sure there's no very poor assets, playgrounds, equipment, as Mike alluded to. Levels of service. For us, there's a community expectation and a desired level of service. Here's an example of a fantastic bedding display. But, we all know that's an expensive way of managing our gardens, and we've reduced a lot of our bedding and areas down to just a few remaining sites now. But we're constantly trying to manage the desired level of service versus the level of service that we can provide in our operational budgets. The LTP, if you look at the top one there, you can see where the big money goes. It's the operating costs. The capital works is, and it used to be that when I first started doing this, that capital projects didn't have a big effect on the bottom line of the LTP and how the world's changed. Now we realise, 10 million's a 1% rate rise. So, we're trying to manage our assets hard. But if you look at the operating costs, we've had a lot of growth. We're providing a lot of service, and that top operating line also includes the corporate costs of the whole organisation, which is 50% of the cost. So, the graph tells the story. Challenges, I could go on for a while here, but I won't. Operational costs, obviously. Adapting to climate change and sea level rise, which will have an impact on a lot of things we do with our network. The growth in the city, and there's been a lot of growth, particularly the last 10 years. I believe we've caught up with that, and we're in a good space with the development agreements we've redone, reserve contributions, and we've tried to push things up to more reflect what they actually cost the city when we're dealing with developers and negotiating development agreements. But it's an uphill battle, and we realise that we're starting to hold the line a bit stronger now, because everything that isn't fit for purpose that we inherit is another cost that's added to our rates. So community expectations is a big one as well. I mean, the world's changed so much. If you look at Porirua Park, the quality of the surface, and Endeavour Park, when I started here 20 years ago, you had to wear gumboots to watch a game of rugby and football in winter. Now it's a different world, and people turn on the television, see a great pitch, and expect that their kids are going to play on it too. So I'm not sure whether we're taking the fun out of it, actually, because sliding around in the mud was one of my fond memories. But the other challenges, this picture here, professional and elite sport and the use of Porirua Park, that comes at a cost to council that we're funding for the region. So these are the things we need to be thinking about. And also there's always more pressure to develop park land and build more infrastructure on our reserves. And we don't apologise for calling that out and being very careful and following the Reserves Act, as Mike mentioned, when it comes to that. Curveballs, that's just a tree down up behind Reserve Road in Plimmerton, and that's just one of the many gullies we have. We're all familiar with Karihana and the flooding issues, and that's one of the feeders from that catchment that goes down there. And lo and behold, whammy, that's what Parks built to prevent a natural, or to manage a natural hazard in that gully. There's 3 of them now up in Plimmerton. And they're basically debris catch nets to stop people from getting wiped out in their houses in the middle of the night by a landslide. This sort of stuff came about from geotech, looking at the gullies after the floods in Karihana. So there's $900K for 3 debris fences to manage a natural hazard. So there's all sorts of challenges and issues, but it's not all bad news for parks. There are a lot of opportunities in our parks, particularly to climate change and sea level rise adaptation, to manage and improve stormwater and flooding in the city. There's some great examples in the world, sponge cities. I'm sure a lot of you have heard and read about them, but there's some real relevant stuff happening in New Zealand. Green and blue corridors. Auckland City Council, as a response to the floods the last big flood event there, have already started building some green and blue corridors where they're removing pipes, daylighting streams, holding water in parks and reserves, but also providing amenity, planting them out. It's a double win, and reducing the impact of climate and flooding. The other thing is ensuring that we have a long-term lens on making sure that we restore the canopy in the city, the tree canopy, which will go a long way to cooling things down, particularly higher up in the catchments, and there's work that's been done to do that. But a lot of the work we've done in the last 10 years is the first stage of planting. It's the baby stuff, and we have to go through and see that through, put big trees back in the city to protect the city from future climate stuff.
Thanks, John.
Pretty much me.
Thanks, Mayor Baker. That's all we wanted to say formally. Have you taken any questions or discussion?
Yep, I've got Mike, Jeff, Ross, Izzy. Mike.
John, yeah, look, first can I say you guys do an amazing job, that the parks we have around the city are fantastic, and I applaud your work there. Just a couple of questions. Mike pointed to the fact that we have some parts that we're Whakakatahi grassland, but we're cutting it for them. Are we cutting back on that amount of work that we're doing there? And what areas would that be?
Yeah, so this is more Daryl's area than John's, but so under the GPS, Whakakatahi has pulled back on some of its funding for things like mowing and litter, actually. We have a contract with, we don't have a contract, we're supposed to have a contract with Whakakatahi. I'm just negotiating that with them at the moment. But one of the sticking points is that they have reduced their funding for things like mowing, and it's actually not a lot of land, but where it does happen is very high profile in areas like Porirua Bay and the along the shared pathway.
Okay, great. Okay, and the wetland that's going in at Cannons Creek there, you guys will have responsibility for that, will you?
Yeah, between us and Wellington Water.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And the last one I had was you talked about improving the canopy around through Cannons Creek, and that you won't be using the Porirua they used in Aotea, will you?
No, and just 40% of our specimen trees are Porirua, so there's a bit of a risk there. So I hate the word, but we're diversifying. It's a buzzword, but yeah.
Thanks.
Jeff?
I got plenty of questions, John, but some of these may have to be answered offline as well. So I'll just put them here and we'll go from there. First of all, with the AMP, can you just give a layperson explanation of how you define an asset as being poor or very poor? We saw that graph of the proportion. How do you determine that?
Yep. Well, it usually needs immediate work, and it has a remaining life of 1 to 2 years. If it's unsafe, we'd close it. You could. An example of that would be a little used walkway that's say a branch of there's one up in Kahu Road from Carville, something like that. Hardly anyone's using it. It was built very steeply, not a great walkway, doesn't meet any standards, it's in poor condition. All we do is make sure that it's still safe to use, and it's way down on the list of renewals because it's not a main arterial and it doesn't get a lot of use.
Okay. So in short, it's going to be a determination that your team's going to make, but it's one that you'll make
engineers,
continuously.
All our structures, tracks, playgrounds, all the high-risk ones are all inspected by engineers in a 3 to 5 year cycle. Playgrounds, 2 years at a very high level, and then monthly by our own staff. Tracks and walkways, 6 monthly and 12 monthly by our own staff. Sports fields, yearly. Courts, yearly, internally by our own staff.
Okay, thanks. Next is, I'm assuming that you'll maintain some agility in terms of the pathway forward, especially as more pressing issues emerge. Part of this what triggers my mind, John, you'll know this well enough, is the issue with regards to the current status of Titahi Bay Surf Club and sea level rise. And so they will be looking for a spot. There is a potential site. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But obviously there has to be some delicate negotiation and whether that and review as to whether or not that's actually the right approach. You guys are still open to having those conversations with people like the surf club about those types of issues?
Yes, we've already started that conversation with the surf club.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of, again, one of the other issues that people bring up a lot are around park benches and so forth. Are we looking at a further contraction in terms of the overall numbers, or a restriction in the like-for-like replacement approach, which I believe has been the status quo positioning around people wanting to have a bench established in honour of somebody that has passed?
Yeah, look, that's a tricky one. I've got a personal view on that, but I won't share it with you. Memorialising parks is a tricky issue because people want to own that park, and you end up in a situation where you create an asset that is very hard to modify, and then who pays for its renewal, who pays for its maintenance. So I believe we've got a system that works reasonably well at the moment, where we target the assets that are in poor condition and offer those if someone wants to do that. So it's win-win for the city. Okay. Now, sometimes it's not in the place that people desire, but what we're not doing is going around sticking more park furniture everywhere. We've had a really good audit. Every bit of park furniture's been audited and condition graded, and and there's a good renewal program, so it works well together.
Okay, thank you for that. The issue of waka kotahi and the type of networks that we are doing work on their behalf in the upcoming negotiation of a contract of service delivery, does that incorporate? I'm just want to be clear here. Whose responsibility does it lie with regards to the section of Titahi Bay Road on the curbside and so forth? Is that's Waka Kotahi property, or is that our property?
No, that's us.
Okay, so obviously that is again a perennial issue because of its high volume throughput and the people who see it, and the growth during the summer months on the curbside and so forth. I don't know how you find a solution to that doesn't involve more money or degrade of levels of service, but that is one that is, I'm reflecting back to my community's view that one is one that should be considered a high priority in so much of the aesthetics, not necessarily the practical implications.
Well, Duncan cleared that last year.
Yeah, and again, this brings me to my next point. How open council to either one-off or ongoing projects led by community to make improvements to sites or assets as part of their goodwill towards the community? I think of not just plantings, not just repairing planting. I'm also thinking about repairs to existing assets, or so in this instance a flagpole there in Titahi Bay, or again following the example of Councillor Duncan going out and weeding the sides of curbs across the city. How open are we on that?
Oh, we're very open actually. We have some challenges, particularly the health and safety and that, and working in the road corridor is such a different ball game. But parks, we're open to it, and we've got examples of where we've done that. Karihana Park and various places around Plimerton and Plimerton Domain and things like that. So
yeah. Sorry, I forgot to push a little bit more on the Waka Kotahi, but also Kāinga Ora. Obviously, there's that the work that they have been doing alongside council with regards to the wetlands in the east. But there's also work that in terms of a potential development of that space. I know councillors have seen some very high level early conversations about redevelopment of those spaces. Is this a trigger for us to say we need to lower our ambition in terms of the timeframes of a project like that being completed in the east?
Oh, that's probably bigger than my pay scale, but
No.
yeah, there's a yeah, that's a good answer.
No, from what I understand, and my mouth is speaking to people, no.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm glad your mouth's been speaking.
I guess.
Trying to be careful here.
Yeah. Notwithstanding the fact that ultimately during long-term plans, it's our opportunity to reinforce the priority order of these sorts of things. Again, reflecting the community here that the East deserves to have those spaces redeveloped as well. Well overdue in that regard.
Cool.
I just want to double check. My understanding is you use that contrast of Whitby and Cannons Creek in terms of trees. And obviously the Whitby trees are going to be closer to maturity than anything that we plant today in the east. Carbon capture, though, only really works for those trees that are not yet mature. So what does that mean in terms of once we're working on the east and improving that in terms of all the other biodiversity improvements? Does that mean for people in Whitby whose trees are going to get quite large and they're going to be only growing so far, and then their contribution to adaptation and climate change reduces very suddenly?
I don't believe so. I think the more mature the tree, the more resilient you are to climate change. That's a proven fact. The more canopy this city has, the cooler it'll be and the more resilient to the weather events we're getting. So full canopy means less rainfall running down the roads and clogging up our stormwater systems. So I'd view it as a win, that.
I was going to say, because I thought I'd come to the rescue and say that there are other benefits as well in terms of improved canopy, in terms of providing a space for improved biodiversity, our native tree, native bird life and so forth. Again, being in Titahi Bay, being able to hear kaka and tui, when I know that people who have lived there in previous decades have not had that joy that many others have had across the motu. So if I understand this correctly, biodiversity is still a big area of focus, notwithstanding our financial challenges. One is obviously improving the canopy, but also in terms of work that could be done around allowing community action on berms and helping the road reserves be part of that solution.
Oh yeah, we're open to everything. We work with the community. That's what we're here for.
Cool. Lastly, I just wanted to also say that one of the other things that the Cancer Society, certainly the Wellington-based, the Wellington Trust, has talked about the benefits as well of improving canopy cover so as to reduce exposure to UV light, especially for our tamariki and mokopuna across the entire city as well. So my observation on that front is that, like biodiversity, these are important curb cutter benefits that cross over and enhance the mahi that's being done. Those are all my questions. Well done.
Thank you. Ross.
Thanks. Yeah, John, I think you guys do a great job, generally speaking, around the area in terms of our parks and reserves. Just following up from others, community action, I just want to I hear what you're saying. Some of the feedback that I get back from the community is that we're not as open to allowing community action as you might perceive or we might perceive. So you understand what I'm saying, don't you? Yeah, all right. Yeah. I'll say no more. The second thing is, in terms of pahutakawas that we were talking about, I guess there are just up the road from where I live, up Whitford Brown Ave, there's a bloody great hunk of footpath that's lifted because of pahutakawa. We're not going to cut down those pahutakawas, though, are we?
Not under
So what are we going to? So, well, you could cut down a pahutakawa, fix the pavement, and ensure that it doesn't happen again, because there's a cost to fixing the pavement, isn't there? And so how do you do that without damaging the tree or whatever? Sorry, it's a specific question. I don't want to get into too much detail.
The whole suburb.
Here.
Yeah,
look, I was just giving one example. They're everywhere.
And look, it's an example of poor streetscape design across the city, that we've inherited, and it's a reactive, it's a case by case reactive thing now. We haven't got a plan to go around removing pahutakawas, but managing the footpaths, and I can't speak. Daryl looks after the roads and the footpaths. I look after the tracks and the parks network, but we have concrete pathways that are affected by trees, Whitby walkways, all asphalt right through the city, trees all up the edge of it, growing through the walkway. We don't go down around and cut the trees down. We actually manage the areas as we can, and that might mean the odd bit of pruning and root pruning and a bit of root guard and a bit of resealing here, grinding to keep levels right, replacing a small section, putting some more root guard around a tree. That's the reactive stuff we do.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. And the key thing that I wanted to ask is, when we talk about desired levels of service, how do we understand what is a desired level of service? Because I think it is really germane to any discussions we have going forward about what costs we're imposing on ourselves through recognising or not recognising levels of service. So, it rolls off the tongue really easily. How do we question what levels of service it is that we may have huge expectations, but people need to understand what the costs of delivering those levels of service are. How are we going to deal with that going forward in terms of our asset management planning and parks and reserves?
Great question. And the first point of call is to look at our asset management plan, and I know that'll bore a lot of you, but the levels of service, the current levels of service are listed in there, and they're broken down into technical levels of service and service outcomes. The technical levels of service are how we measure what we're delivering. So if you want to, if you look at things and look at affordability and you want to reduce service, first place we look is those technical levels of service, and can we reduce them to reduce costs. So the AMP's a moving live document. They should always be. They're often done every 3 years and thrown in the cupboard, and no one ever reads them. We tried to do ours so it's a narrative of what we're doing. The improvement plan at the end of it's worth a read. Even the executive summary for everyone in here would be worth a quick read. But if you look at the way the levels of service are set out in there, they're quite prescriptive technically, and they all relate to condition and suitability. The desired levels of service we're talking about quite often is the community's perception of the level of service we're providing, and that's where we need your support when we're dealing with the community on what we can afford and what we can't.
So if I can just add, so one of the key issue here is we don't currently publish our asset management plans. It's in our work program over the next 12 months to make sure they're in a position where we can actually make them publicly available.
Is that you, Ross? I've got a list of people. Or you? No? Izzy?
I think some of them have been asked, but you didn't mention tennis or netball courts in your initial blurb around the parks, and that's included in parks and...
No, I did. I said courts, but sorry.
I think you mentioned it.
He said courts,
Yeah.
So, I was just thinking about Kapi Mana and the last time that was ever upgraded in terms of our asset management.
Yeah, that's 2017 we did some work there, and there's we've got the next 2 years we'll be renewing the lights there, about 350 k's worth. So that's in our current AMP at the moment. The courts are resurfaced on a condition base, so those asphalt courts are generally in average condition. So there's none of those courts are in poor condition at the moment. And the part what makes up the courts, the the four main assets is the court surface. The fencing's a big one. We've done a lot of refurbishment and maintenance on the fencing. That's in average condition. It's old, but it's in average condition. And the lights were the biggie. And while I mentioned lights, we've upgraded quite a few sets of sports field lights, and particularly the last 3 years. And those ones are our priority.
So I think I'm probably referring more to like Court 4 at Kapimana, which can be quite dangerous in the wintertime, and because it's got a lot of tree cover there.
Yeah.
It gets slippery for the kids that are on the tree cover. Because the thing with trees is it provides the canopy cover, but it also provides a lot of leaves that go into the gutters that we have to clear out whenever there's imminent rain coming or floods. But in particular, that court,
Very
Court 4,
challenging court.
as well as Ascot Park's court, which is also very slippery and has a lot of gaps in there for the kids that use that to practice and train on. So just put that up.
Yeah, cool.
And then I felt really old when I saw that Jerry Collins come up, because I remember playing on that field or training on the field when there was no Jerry Collins stand there. And then you said it was like 20 years ago. It was like, jeez. Before that. On the Waka Kotahi issue and the grass being cut, Mike mentions area in Porirua North, but I've had a lot of our community ask about the road reserve, bottom of Whitford. Is that Waka Kotahi, or is that, because it's quite overgrown at the moment, so where the lights are, that is Waka Kotahi?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and also the walkway between Conclusion and Wallspite Avenue, that kids are, there's bumblebees and stuff because of the daisies and flowers are coming up there, so kids are in danger of trying to pass the...
One of the challenges with the vegetation control on the walkways is that, depending on the level that the walkway's used, the vegetation control might be 4 cycles a year or something like that, and it's often a timing issue.
Yeah.
If you go in the beginning of spring and do a full renovation to it, 3 weeks later it's all grown back. 6 weeks later it's huge. Now, our level of service is some of those walkways would be done 4 times a year.
So that one in particular, though, from Conclusion down to Wallspite, that the kids
Conclusion to Wallspite.
near Countdown.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah,
kids
yeah,
are walking
yeah,
that every day on a daily basis. So I would imagine that is a high use area.
That's usually
would
a
be-
pretty well maintained walkway, but given the current weather,
today it isn't.
it could probably grow, half a metre in a month.
Yeah. And so we were talking about community volunteers, I guess. Is there an opportunity, I guess, for those sort of areas where maybe it doesn't fit into the schedule for a community, what can you say, like a handy person or group to maybe be contracted to get that done so that it gets done? Or
It would be a freebie, it wouldn't be a contract.
Yeah. I mean, our level of service at the moment would be on that walkway is done to one of our highest standards.
Right,
So, and it is a natural area, and I know the walkway really well. I've used it a lot, and normally it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And the main asset on the walkway is the track surface, and it's in really good condition.
yeah, the track is fantastic. It's the overgrown grass that's on the track that's the issue. Yeah, cool. Thanks. That's me.
Kylie?
Yeah, a couple of my questions have been commented on. No particular answers, but that's okay. So talking about, we'll go back to the beginning, talking about trees, you talk about, I remember Mike was saying, if it's a safety issue, then obviously the tree will come down. So my question is about trees that are causing issues underground, because we do have a lot of them in the city where they are causing quite a bit of damage, not just to property, but obviously to our, for our roading team, it would be a nightmare as well with the water and all that kind of thing. And this is particularly on berms, which I understand is a roading issue, but you obviously look at the trees first before you do anything. How long do we leave broken pipes spilling out water because of tree roots, how long do we leave that before we look at it? Because I can tell you right now, Wellington Water takes 1 to 2 years for one tree causing issues. So how does that come up in our park assets?
Yeah, well, we manage the tree, not the water asset. So
So pipes. So often these issues with pipes. So Pahoots do get into pipes as well. So we see them with berms and footpaths, but actually the damage they cause to our Three Waters network is significant as well. So we do have a level of service for repair of water leaks, as you know. That has not been that flash over the last couple of years, but it's not unusual for us to have a complex issue where we have roots that go across private land and then into public land, and a council tree involved in some of these as well. So often we have to pull together multiple parties to deal with a leak. But there is a level of service that I can provide you about how quickly Wellington Water should respond to a water leak, regardless of where it is and where it's come from. So if you've got a specific one, I'll be happy to look at it for you.
So sorry, what would need to happen for you just to take the tree out if it's causing all these issues on a boom? Like, I don't understand.
So as John says, we don't like to just whop trees down. Sometimes it's complicated because if there's the one I'm thinking of that you're talking about.
There's actually quite a few. There's one along Mungavin Avenue, which is outside 63 Mungavin Ave. There's the one in Plympton as well, which I do understand there's a private property issue and stuff like that as well. But I just noticed that there are a few trees causing issues to a few properties and a few of our pipes and assets. I've never seen them removed.
Occasionally we will do it, but it's usually the last resort because people generally love trees.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the last resort. Okay. The other one was obviously along the Link Road in Waitanginua. Waka Kotaki will be saving a bit of money in mowing there, won't they, for the next 6 months, considering it's closed? 5 months? No, it'll be 6 months.
So we're familiar with the issues with that mowing, and Daryl and his team are looking and working with the asset owner as to how we might actually do some plantings or other things that might actually better deal with that issue, because you can't actually get in there to cut that grass, right, when the road's live. So Daryl's working through that now as to we'll take the opportunity while it's closed to see what we can do to fix that.
Perfect. Sorry, I've been away, so just bear with me. Just bear with me. The other thing as well is I was just going back to Izzy's point around the rugby fields and the courts, and I do realise that in 2017 you guys did some great work there with the replanting of the bank and also with the seating and things like that. But I do support Izzy in the fact that there are some courts, and it's not just court 4, but it's up, I think, between 5 and 8, where it's really, really slippery for the kids and stuff at the back. And so we haven't, I don't think, when was the last time, do you know, that we resurfaced those courts? I think it was, how many courts did you resurface? I can't remember.
Yeah, we do it in hits there because there's 10 courts, so we usually do it in blocks of 2 or 3 down the bottom all at the same time. The last ones, I believe, were the ones right in front of the club rooms, Kapimana netball there. Yeah, those 2.
5 and 6.
Yep, that 5 and 6. They were the ones in worst condition, and I would say the next ones on the list would be the ones to the north of that. They'd be the older courts. But it'll depend on courts 1, 2 and 3, which are the most used.
Correct.
How what the condition of them is. But an asphalt court, you usually get 20 years out of an asphalt court. So they were all done less than 20 years ago.
Yeah. Have we had a look at, it'd be interesting to see the costs involved with, similar to what they do at Hataitai. At those netball courts and stuff, it's a lot more expensive, but it would just be interested to see what the costs would be there. Now, put me out of misery. Is gorse a fire hazard?
No, the person with the matches is the fire hazard.
Because you know what? I get so many complaints about gorse and that we don't remove gorse and it's such a fire hazard and stuff like that. I was like, it's not a fire hazard unless there's a fire, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had to ask the question. With the rugby fields, yes. So you were talking about Porirua Park obviously being highly used now. And I do remember this year, just recently, both Anita and I went to a couple of games there. And I can tell you, you don't have the mud fully under control. It was awful. So, yeah, we've still got a little bit of work to go there for that particular surface.
Oh, yeah,
because
I know
we were
that.
swimming
I know
in
that
it.
particular weekend, yes.
Yeah. There was two
I
weekends.
don't think that was the park's fault.
Sorry, let me just get through this. Oh, rubbish bins. Now, I know that's a...
I know, it
That's
sits with
okay.
us, yeah.
Okay, so I do realise that you've been taking some rubbish bins away because it is the expectation that the public should be taking their own rubbish home, and I get that, but that doesn't work for our area. Because what happens is that, and I will give Plymerton, for example, I know that there is a big issue about health and safety and replacing that and all that kind of thing. But recently, there has been a lot more rubbish just thrown all over the floor, even though they only have to walk like literally less than a minute down there. But I think public perception is like, there's no rubbish bin, oh well. And then Ross was talking about before how, you know, pet owners and most responsible pet owners pick up their dog poo and plastic and all that kind of thing. And I'll give you Camborne Walkway as one example. There is nothing along the way. And so people just leave their rubbish and stuff down on the ground there, and it's up to the general public to pick it up and put it in the bin. Now, I know that we should be telling people and educating people that you need to take it or walk it, but actually common sense tells us that people don't have common sense. So what they do is just throw it all over the place. So although taking away bins is a good thing, it might save money, it actually isn't in the long run because the council and our roadside crew are going back and picking all the rubbish up anyway. So I would have a think about that. Thank you.
Nathan.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the work that the Parks team do. And it's great to note that the Whenua-Tapu Cemetery retained its green flag status recently, which is awesome. After our site visit up there the other month, it's a beautiful site. I just had a couple of questions around on that graph of expenditure. Levels of service sort of goes up quite drastically in 27-28. What's driving that?
It'll be the two new projects. It'll be We Near a Foreshore Esplanade development and Aratahi Titahi Bay Beach South development. Those two are level, are recorded as levels of service. They actually, that the whole project. So between the two of them, that's about 9.8 million or 9.6 million. In real terms, there's probably a renewal component in that as well, because they're existing, there's playground there, there's infrastructure. Both those sites, they're both 40 plus years old and haven't had any upgrade to their infrastructure, but it's recorded as levels of service because it is a new level of service. But if you look at, say, the Aratahi Titahi Bay Beach South one, I mean, that's redoing the road and the parking and to reduce congestion and improve access to the beach. So it might be a level. It's recorded as a level of service, but it's also a renewal and an upgrade of existing assets.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And we've talked a lot about trees and the importance that they play in providing a canopy and all that sort of stuff. How open is the council to having trees as memorials in place of the park benches?
Same as the park benches. Memorialising parks is a tricky business, and there are places where you can memorialise. Cemeteries in particular spring to mind. It makes, particularly for long-term planning and use of public spaces, creating memorials can be fraught, especially for individuals. Because once you memorialise that site, if we did have to move that tree because it was blocking the pipes, you end up in a position not being able to. So,
All right. No, thank you.
I've got a couple. Tiro Bay Beach and the padlock that's broken. I'm sure you're working on it because I've had it, I don't know how many times in my inbox, and the comms that are coming out are zero. And I just wonder when you get a complaint that comes through, you don't know about the broken padlock at the beach by the surf club?
No, I don't. Sorry, Peter, I don't.
Right. Yep, we will take that one offline. I'm sure it'll be fixed quite quickly. Shade sails, we don't put anything in
No.
parks, and we're planting trees, but here we haven't done any trees. When we originally looked at it, did we think about that? I've just had those questions from people. Do we actually look at, I know the structures are expensive, just wondered.
Yeah, we've tended to avoid them in this city. We've had some bad experiences with them. They're expensive. They have a short life with the UV in Wellington and the wind, and they require significant structures and engineering. That's probably a good example of where you could have one. There's a lot of shade around that area, but none in the park. You get a bit of shade off the structures, but it's probably something we could look at. It may have been in the original design and removed as a cost saving, but to make it affordable. But we have the same issue with playgrounds. And what we try and do is plant trees in them and naturalise them because they are our neighbourhood parks, and we've got 46 of them. And if we followed the Cancer Foundation's guidelines, we'd be building 46 shade sails over our playgrounds, and a lot of them are in gullies and sheltered areas. They're damp. In winter, it's a total turn-off to people using them. So then the only thing you can do is, build structures, install them, take them down. So we've gone for the tree option as our go-to response.
Okay, another comment, like there's been mentioned around the table, the bin removal in Plympton from the beach entry to the top of the street is the most stupid thing has ever been decided in that department. Because people do not work to the top of the street and put their rubbish. The people that live next door to it are having to bring their wheelie bins out and spend an awful lot of time cleaning up. They're getting very angry. I'm getting angry getting all their bloody emails for something that has no common sense. So I'd just like you to re-look at one street in particular.
So we've actually done that just in the last 24 hours.
Thank
Baker,
you.
we've looked at and fixed it. Yep.
Thank you very much. Because sometimes I think we make decisions and we don't think about them. And if you're not sure, please run them past us. Sports clubs and the size of them. I understand some of our clubs are getting rather large, and somebody has told them they're going to have to limit the number of kids they have in them. Is that a decision that No. I'll take that one offline as well. Well, it has. It's come from here, so I'll take that one offline. Yep. I'll put you on the list. I did see you there. That'll do for me in the meantime. So I've got Kathleen, then Tracy, then Jeff.
Kia ora, John. My question, I've just got one, and it's around cost savings. So, are there opportunities being explored with, say, contractors? For instance, on Titahi Bay Main Road, we've got the electricity pipes or cables being put down, and they've got traffic management. Is there an opportunity for like the lawns to further down to be mowed and kind of leverage their traffic management?
That's a timing issue, I suspect. I mean, yeah, if it was us working on the road, yes.
Can you talk into your microphone?
Sorry, some of the road I understand along Titahi Bay Road on the harbour side is done by our roading contractor, and on the other side and the reserves is done by parks. So most of our stuff can be done without traffic control. So, so what specific area are you talking about?
It just kind of triggered my memory when Councillor Duncan's about the story about him getting into the gutters last year and taking the weeds out. Sorry, that didn't sound right where I just said it. No, but it's more, so it is on the harbour side,
Right.
and, there's lots of, grass growing on the harbour side, and that's the side where currently the traffic management is. And I just saw it the other day and I thought, oh, is there an opportunity to cut the grass while they're managing the traffic and further down,
Yeah, there would be, if as depending on the sort of work they're undertaking.
But what you're saying is that's a transport matter, is it, for that side?
It's a tricky one because some of the roads managed by transport, the vegetation, and some of it's parks.
But I think the short answer is yes, we should always be looking for opportunities where we can to be more efficient in how we do it. Sometimes we catch it. Good example would be the shared path where we managed to fix the pipes before we sealed over the top of it. From time to time we miss it. Process Street's probably the main example of that. So we can always be better. It all comes back to infrastructure and about how we make sure that we prioritise and take the opportunities when there is traffic management in place, Councillor. But so the short answer is yes, there are opportunities for us to be smarter.
Okay, thanks. Tracy?
Thank you. My questions have been answered, but I love what the team does on our assets around the city, and particularly the parks, and I'm a daily walker on Camborne, and I think it's looked after really well, and numerous other walks as well, but that's a bit of a favourite. And sometimes I think a bit of long grass about a walk in between mows, particularly on Camborne Walkway, is not a bad thing. And for me, it adds to a bit of authenticity about getting out and going for a walk. And while I always admire it when it's been mowed, and I think that's a highly used walk that is regularly mown, I think sometimes we get a bit hard out about what needs to have picket fences and be neatly mown and look all perfect. So I just want to say I love what you do, and I really hope that we can kind of manage the levels of service in the way that we're already doing.
Jeff?
So you'd like us to reduce the mowing on Camborne, Tracy?
No, sorry, we're trying to round this up. I've got Jeff and then Moses going to be our last one.
Okay, so thank you. And I apologise that I didn't put this in with the previous questions as well. It would be remiss of me, though, however, if I did not relay the concern of Josh Twaddle, who lives in the Bay. He's particularly passionate around skate parks and skate areas, and would like to see an increased presence of skate parks, whether it's in the Bay, in the city, what have you. Improvements made in that line. I know that officers have been meeting with concerned people like Joshua as well. What I get worried about in terms of that asset management plan, and again, the possibility that we are lowering expectations, is that people like Joshua are going to get frustrated that they will feel like they're going to be the last person on the to be served, or their interest to be served, because of the relative positioning of where skate parks come to all the other things that we do as well. Can you give me an assurance that we can continue to have meaningful conversations with people around skate parks, around the renewals of existing infrastructure, and a future where they can actually see that there's going to be a time frame for when new skate parks are going to be incorporated into our planning?
Yeah, we definitely are. We're mindful of that. We've got Te Raupraha Park, which, if you look at it, is no spring chicken nowadays as well. So, and if you start looking at our assets, we've got 4 big ones across the city, and the west doesn't have one. So we're very mindful of that. Finding a suitable site and getting the community on board with it is challenging as well.
That is so true, because other suburbs are asking for them to be taken out because of the noise, and so it's a hard one. But I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Hayward. Right, Mose, wrap it up.
Hey, I just want to ask a question for Sione from Cannons Creek. He was asking about fruit trees. When you go to replanting trees in the east, What are the chances we could look at doing fruit trees?
Yeah,
Thank you, Sione.
No, we're always open to that. We've planted harvest trees in Bothamley Park, and it's been closed for a while. And it's the sooner that infrastructure's done and we can open it up, the better for the community. So we're always open to it, particularly in neighbourhood parks. If the community's interested, just come and talk to us.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a break online. We're having morning tea. We're back at 25 to 11. Let's start that again. Welcome back. We're online again. We are doing a Spicer Landfill Assets Management. So I'm going to hand over to Mike again. Do you want questions at the end?
I think that might be best,
Okay.
Mayor Baker. So thanks again, councillors. Look, the landfill is an entirely different asset class, obviously, but in more ways than one than parks. Parks, generally speaking, is out in the open. Everybody sees it. Everybody has a view on it. Waste is kind of the opposite. No one knows what goes on. Everyone thinks we just chuck everything in a hole in the ground, which we kind of do, but it's a very high-tech, highly managed hole in the ground that David's going to talk you through. So the other thing about waste is it's highly commercial, so highly sensitive to things like price. And so waste is where local government and all of our kind of bureaucracy rubs up against a really hard-assed, highly commercial sector. So that gives us a whole bunch of challenges. We're fortunate in Porirua to own a landfill. About half the councils in New Zealand own landfills, and the rest are pretty much in a market that's dominated by 2 or 3 big players. But we're quite unique with our landfill, which, by the way, has some of the best views in the whole of the city. So I will leave David to talk you through some of the ins and outs of this asset and where we're headed. Massive financial implications with this one, and quite technical in places. But David, over you to talk us through the next bit. Oh, and can I introduce Maria, please, one of David's team members who's joining us at the table for the first time. Maria will talk to you about some detailed aspects of the alternatives assessment later on in the presentation. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Mike. Kia ora koutou. Good morning, councillors. As Mike says, the asset, for the whole of the waste activity, we have basically one asset. And unlike Julian's assets and Daryl's transport assets in the Three Waters, they're not contiguous whole of district networks. It's in a very specific location. So I wanted to talk through some of the technical aspects of looking after Spicer Landfill, and then we have a second report, item 1.3 on the workshop agenda, which is to talk about the alternatives to Spicer Landfill moving forward. Firstly, just an introduction to the waste hierarchy, which you have seen in various forms before. The point of this is that we have a lot of management techniques for different waste streams that we can use. Spicer Landfill has a very particular role at the very bottom of the waste hierarchy, and that is a point at which we can no longer do anything with what we've got left over after we've eliminated waste or reused an item, recycled an item, recovered value out of an item. When there's nothing left, we've got the landfill. Just to talk about how the landfill actually works in a sort of a diagrammatic way, there are 2 points of entry effectively. One is the transfer station, what we call the RTS, Refuse Transfer Station, that is the use of domestic and residential users coming in, and the other is the weighbridge. Domestic waste comes to the transfer station, but then it's picked up and put across the weighbridge before it finally ends up in the landfill. The big commercial and the rubbish trucks that do curbside and commercial pickup all go over the weighbridge before they head to the landfill. We've got clean fill that comes in, which is put into storage. We don't actually take all clean fill that's necessarily to be disposed of, but what we do is we keep enough clean fill to be able to use it for operating material for the landfill, as opposed to using the valuable airspace to simply dump clean material. We also have material coming in across the weighbridge, which is to be used for roads and cover material. At the moment, all of the glass, as you're aware, which we're taking to the landfill, is coming in as operating material. It gets crushed and used as roads. And then we have commercial green waste that comes in, not an awful lot of it, but that does go when it comes in large truckloads across the weighbridge and left in the green waste area. And then we've got residential green waste. The residential green waste is your weekend trailers and so on. We get more of that than we do of the commercial. To take a look at the location from an aerial view, as you're approaching from Broken Hill Road, you'll pass Trash Palace on the right. That's our current tip shop. Excuse me. Our bulk recycling facility is on the left as you come in. Proceeding up the road, we've got the weighbridge and kiosks, so residential customers to the left, past the kiosk, all the big commercial customers to the right over the weighbridge. The refuse transfer station is the stop for those smaller residential loads or the green waste drop-off. And then the actual active cell, I'll refer to the cell, this is the current filling area, is further up the road to the right. So the only people who will be seeing that area are the commercial loads, the big trucks that go past the refuse station and all the way up to the top. Now on that slide, Linda, can you locate the play button? We have, just before you press that, we've got software run by our operators, which is drone photography taken every few months, and it's loaded onto a software platform that I'm able to go onto, and I've compiled a little bit of a fly-through to give you an idea of the scale, the height, and the size and shape of the area from the air. So Linda, can you press that play button for us, please? The quality's not the best, but this was not made for this purpose, but we'll go with it. So as you enter from Broken Hill Road, there is Trash Palace on the right, bulk recycling facility just at the bottom there on the left of the road. You proceed up, two things on this shot. The first to the left is the new green waste area, which has just been built, and to the right, the kiosk, weighbridge and the residential and domestic drop-off. Up the road to the refuse transfer station and the Enviro Waste offices to the right of the screen there, which have now been removed, and I can talk about that a little bit later. And then as we move up the site, this is the top southern end of the site, which is the landfill itself. And you can see the roads winding around there that are used by the commercial trucks going up to the active tip face, which is about just to the left of the middle of the screen there, a slightly bluish area. This photography was taken at the end of September, and that area is where the actual drop-off is for the time being. And then from the southern end looking north towards the harbour, point to note there is all the trucks, which you can see. That's difficult to manage from time to time. We do have a traffic light system in at the moment just to help flow. And then the final view here, this is where we are about to construct the next cell. And I'll just move on from there. Right, cell 3. This is the next major development. We're currently operating what we call cell 2. Oh, this is cell 2.1. That is the final form of what cell 2.1 will look like when it's actually full, which will be somewhere around 2028. In order to be able to keep the landfill open, we therefore have to start planning and indeed building the next cell right now. The final cover on top of cell 2 is what actually caps the entire site off. That would be about 1/2 metre deep. And at that point, that part of the landfill is finished off. And then we're into cell 3A. So just before I move on, you'll notice to the bottom right, you can still see the Enviro Waste offices there by the refuse transfer station. And then just to the right of the screen, the old green waste area, which is now being replaced. There is a road that commercial users going up to this site use to exit the site. And that is the footprint of cell 3A, which commenced construction formally on Thursday last week. To note on there, if you look to the very, very right of the screen, you can see what looks like a ramp coming down the hill, and that is the top of the slope. And it's a little difficult to see there, but we're effectively going to create a new bowl shape with a new batter, a new slope to the very right there. And inside that is where the next fill of waste will take place. The road exiting would then swing around to the right. As you look there, you can see that the old green waste area has now been covered over with the footprint of that cell, and half of the Enviro Waste offices have also been covered over with the footprint of that cell. We've removed all of the offices because that remaining space will be the new exit out for domestic customers using the transfer station. And once that cell is full, that will be the final cap. So that's what the view would look like somewhere in about 5 years' time, once the cell is being used. I've brought Maria to the table to introduce Maria to you all. Project manager. Maria's got two major projects at the moment, which are the reconsenting of the landfill and Cell 3A construction, which the Cell 3A will be one of the biggest capital projects we undertake outside of Three Waters for the next 10 years or so. What the landfill looks like inside, Mike mentioned it was high-tech, so I'll just spend a bit of time on that. This is a cross-section through, I confess, it's an American diagram, so they talk about garbage, not rubbish, but they're all pretty much the same. Underneath, we've got the subsurface, which is the natural groundwater, of course, at the very bottom. When we build the bowl is initially built with a clay lining that forms the underlying shape of it. On top of the bowl, there's a couple of layers of synthetic membrane liners, and those liners on the very bottom on top of the clay are what prevents leachate from getting its way through to the subsurface and the groundwater. On top of the liner material, we then lay leachate pipes, which are covered in a bed of drainage material, and then we're ready to start filling the landfill up. Just noting on that particular diagram, the first layer of waste is described as shredded tyres. We don't do that in New Zealand. What we do is lay something called a fluff layer, and the fluff layer is basically chosen soft material that forms the first layer in the cell, and that is to prevent anything from punching its way through the liner. As the cell is filled, we then put gas pipes through the cell, which go out to wellheads and then off for flaring. I'll show what that looks like soon. And then, not displayed on this diagram, we also have storm drainage all around the entire site as well. So what that looks like in real life, this is the construction of the current cell, Cell 2.1, as it was in the middle of lockdown 2020 when we were building the current cell. To the right of the screen is the original clay liner, and that forms the bowl upon which the rest of the cell sits. And the left side of the screen is the geotextile layer, which is put down, and that's the effective membrane that protects leachate from getting through to the ground underneath. Once all of the geotextile layer is put down, we then put our leachate lines on top of it. So this is a view of the cell, current cell in June 2020. At this point here, all of the clay bowl has been formed. The textile layer has been laid down. There's a shallow layer of clay on top. That's what you're looking at there. And then the leachate lines, which look like the veins of a leaf running downhill. Inside each of those grey lines is a pipe, perforated pipe, that will extract all of the leachate out downhill and off to a leachate pond. On top of the surface, we've then got control over stormwater. Obviously, the site is open, there's a lot of sediment, so in order to be able to contain sediment from entering the downstream Mitchell stream, all of the runoff that happens from the landfill is directed to a sediment retention pond. That's at the very top of the Spicer Botanical Park. The stormwater that runs on the terrain around the site is directed to Mitchell Stream, but it's done in such a way that the two runoffs are held separate. So around the entire site is a drainage system where one can't interfere with the other. We check on that to make sure that we're keeping the landfill runoff out of Mitchell Stream, or at least the sediment out of Mitchell Stream, by a monitoring regime down in the stream itself, which we take tests of the stream water every month and then get those analysed to make sure we're not getting any sediment from the landfill itself. Underground, as you saw on the previous photo, we've got our drainage system, and the drainage system takes the leachate, drainage system takes the leachate out to a leachate pond, again at the bottom of the site, and that leachate is then fed into the wastewater network and eventually gets its way through to the treatment plant. For the gas, we've got wells all over the site. I've shown 3 here just for purposes of illustration. There's actually about 90 of them on the site now. The wells are put into the cell as the cell's being built, or sometimes we'll sink in a well retrospectively if we've got issues with gas emissions coming through particular spots. We can sink extra wells down to try and extract more gas out. The gas wellheads look like that. So if you're looking from the transfer station up towards the hill, you may see some of those wellheads on the northern slope. There's a network of pipes underground that take all of the gas through to a gas flare. That's the flare we have at Spicer there. The one to the right, the larger chimney, is the main flare that's currently burning in excess of about 500 cubic metres of gas an hour. The smaller chimney to the left is the backup. And you'll be aware that we've got a plan in place with an Australian company. We've signed an agreement up for them to be able to place a generator on site that will burn the gas first to make electricity. Any residual gas will then go off to the flare. In order to do our monitoring, we have a number of monitoring stations for atmospheric conditions, temperature, all around the place. We've got base weather stations at those locations. We have an environmental air quality monitor at the landfill. We refer to this as the moat monitor. It's quite a big one. And we've installed a second moat monitor at Westwood Drive in Tawa. And about 3-4 months ago, we then got hold of some additional monitors. They're much smaller, much cheaper, and these are the ones we refer to as the Omnis monitors. We've got 3 of those placed around the landfill. The deal with those ones is that we can connect those through a system called EVS Omnis that we can actually track everything live online. This is what the online track looks like. What you're looking at there is an aerial shot of the Spicer landfill. Those green triangles are, put this another way, sorry. The little green spots there are each of the monitors, the air quality monitors that we've got in place. Those green triangles are tracing anywhere where there is a measurement of something being detected by the monitor. The green triangles are indicating where that is coming from. So the one to the very north, the view we're looking at here is hydrogen sulfide measured as micrograms per cubic metre. The monitor to the very north registers 0. The monitor to the east registers 0. The monitor to the west has a small reading at the point in time when the screenshot was taken. The very bottom monitor is the one sitting in Tawa. We look at this reasonably regularly to assess whether we have an issue coming up, or if we have complaints, we can go back in time and take a look at the weather conditions, temperature, wind direction, wind speed, all combined to be able to assess what might have been going on. We do have a public version of this coming up. It's just being tested at the moment, and we'll be releasing this so that if you're interested, you've got a complaint or you're smelling something from your Tawa residents, you can go online, or you will be able to go online very shortly and take a look at what's happening. The trace elements that we're measuring at the moment are hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, particulates, that's dust, and we've also got battery readings coming through as well. Challenges for the landfill. The first one is that we are running out of capacity. So at the present time, we've got about 350,000 tonnes worth of capacity left. That will steadily run out, of course, as demand keeps coming in. In 2028, we will have the next cell online. We'll be back up to full capacity, but again, of course, we'll be running down over time. We have an issue with biosolids. Biosolids is actually a regional problem. There are 3 landfills in the region. Of those 3, we're the only landfill that actually has headroom to take any additional wastewater treatment plant sludge over and above what we already get. The graph here is displaying how much sludge we're allowed to take. That's the red line, which is 16.6% of all waste coming in. The blue lines are the month-on-month intake of sludge from our treatment plant, and there is a gap between them. That's something of a luxurious position for us. At Silverstream, there is no gap. At Southern Landfill, there is no gap. So therefore, we've already had an approach from Kapiti Coast District Council. Can we please bring our wastewater treatment plant sludge into you? It's a regional problem, as I say. If we are determined to be running down our demand and doing better waste diversion, waste minimisation, at the same time, we've still got an output of sludge from all of the treatment plants in the region, and that won't be slowing down. So we've got a looming problem. Challenges, consent. We've got three major challenges ahead with the consent project that Maria is heading up. The first major challenge is the location of the landfill. Now, while there is not a set in place legal distance that a landfill has to be from a residential community, each distance is based on the type of landfill, the management technique, how it's built, etc., etc. But it would be commonly accepted that you're at least a couple of kilometres away from any residential neighbourhood. The minimum distance that we've got is something more in the order of about 370 metres. So we're awfully close to some residential property, and that is one of the very major difficulties that we're going to have in seeking a new consent. The second one is a geotechnical issue, which is that Spicer landfill happily sits on top of the Ohario fault line. So we have had quite an amount of drilling done around the site over the last couple of years to determine how big an issue that is. We can overcome it with a higher standard of build for the new liner, but it doesn't change the fact that we are sitting on top of quite a major fault line. And the third major challenge that we've got with our consent is not actually a Spicer issue, it's the acceptability of landfills in New Zealand generally. And any time that there has been a consent for a new large landfill, there has been severe public opposition to it. The Dome Valley landfill in Auckland was consented last year. The company building that spent $50 million just to get a resource consent for that landfill. And it's a fact of life. It's a landfill. It's full of nasty, horrible waste, and no one wants it near them, so there will be opposition to it. And one of the major problems with location is that we do have odour issues at the landfill at the moment. So the graph here is of complaints coming in about landfill odour going back to 2012, taken on a month-by-month basis. So we had a bit of a spike in 2015. That was put down to the way in which we were managing the sludge that was coming in from the treatment plant, and that management, the handling technique was changed. And so for a while, we had a pretty good run until about 2022, and we started talking to our public Tawa community. We did some engagements regarding the resource consent and starting to let people know we were getting to the point where we had to look for more space. And simultaneous with that, we had cell 2.1 opened, which is a highly efficient cell. A bunch of factors, we have suddenly got a huge spike in complaints. So I've put this particular graph up to the Tawa Community Liaison Group a little while ago just to say the problems in 2015 were a shadow of what we've got now. This is our biggest consenting issue that we have in front of us. And we've got rising demand. This is a graph of the tonnage coming into the landfill again since 2012. The red line on the bottom is all of the domestic waste coming in. That's the stuff that goes to the transfer station. And the blue line is total demand. So the difference between those two is all the stuff that's being brought in by the big commercial companies. A couple of things to point out on this graph. The first thing is the graph starts with total demand, that's the blue line, hovering at about 4,000 tonne. If we move over to the right of the graph, we see we're peaking somewhere close to 8,000 tonne per month. There is a little bit of a drop-off at the moment. So last year's full annual tonnage was actually less than the year before, We think that may be a combination of probably a few things, but principally just a slight downturn in the economy, slowdown in business. And to that, if you have a look at July 2020, the red spike just completely drops off the chart, and that's because everyone was told to stay home for a period of about 4 or 5 weeks. Corresponding that, you can see there's a dip in total demand, and there was also a slowdown in commercial waste coming in. The other notable feature of that graph, sitting at about July 2016, is a very, very pronounced spike upwards, and that's the aftermath of the flooding event that we had during that year. In the grand scheme of things, it only actually represents about 3,000 tonnes of waste, but it all came in one massive hit, which is something for us to think about whether we could even manage that again and what effect it might have on us in the long term. Last few slides just on cost. The two graphs here, the one on the left, the grey one, is our revenue. The one on the right is our cost. These are the figures we're currently projecting in the long-term plan from 24 to 2034. And there is a gap between them. Obviously, we are making more money that comes in than we're having to spend to run the place, and that gap is principally two things that we see there. One is the building of future cells and servicing the capital cost of keeping the landfill open, and the other thing is putting money into reserve for the day that the landfill has to close. And the crunch point when the day comes the landfill has to close is that there will be no revenue if it's total closure. However, there's a new cost introduced which is called aftercare. And the aftercare cost comes about that although you're not taking any more waste, you still have a site which is full of nasty toxic stuff, and we will still have to be monitoring it, and there will still be some operation required. So therefore there's a new cost which at the moment we suspect somewhere around $500,000 a year that will have to be spent, but without the revenue to be able to pay for it. That's off in the future once we actually close the entire site. From a point of view of where does your cost per tonne go, so you bring in a tonne of rubbish, the current charge on that is $225. Those are the components that make that cost up. The thing I want to point out most about this graph is if you take a look at the bottom left and the very bottom, ETS, that's our emissions trading scheme cost, and the waste levy, and add those two things together, they're effectively government charges which make up pretty close to 40% of the cost of bringing rubbish in. And the last chart on this particular series is our landfill capital costs. We've got in the long-term plan 3 major lumps of capital. The first one from 24 to 27, and that is the cost of building Cell 3A and also of securing the resource consent. Regarding Cell 3A, we've got a wonderful position at the moment that we've actually entered into a contract and would see the construction of that cell for something in the order of maybe $3 million less than what we thought. And that's a combination of good economic factors, construction industries looking for work to do, and earthworks. Now is a really good time to be looking for contracts based on earthworks, which is obviously what Cell 3A is all about. The second bit of capital there from 28 to 2030 is the next cell, which is Cell 4A. Cell 4A requires consent beyond 2030. So our current consent will expire in 2030. We're no good building Cell 4A until we've got a consent beyond 2030, because that's when Cell 4A would come into action. And the lumps sitting at 2033 and 2034 are the cell that would take place after Cell 4A. Which is the end of that particular slide. I'm happy to take questions on that.
We're definitely taking questions because everyone's starting to look a little bit like they need to stretch and
Sure.
play. So I've got Mike, Ross, and then Jeff. Anyone else want their hands in there? No.
Thanks for that. That was pretty comprehensive, impressive stuff. The scary aftercare we talk about. I grew up in Porirua East, and I used to do all my scavenging at the tip there in Mungavin Avenue or on Seavers Grove. There was never any gas capture or anything. Is that in danger of blowing up there, that whole tip area?
It's not in danger of blowing up. However, in the last couple of months, we have had Greater Wellington approach us and say, give us a little bit of detail about Seavers Grove. What are the risks?
Yeah.
So that is a piece of work we'll have to do fairly shortly.
Okay. And like moving to the 3A to the base area where you're going to now, that'll be moving further away from those tawa houses, won't it?
Yeah, Cell 3A is further away, and it's also lower than the current height which we're working at. So on balance, that is to our advantage.
So for the resource consent, that's a goodie.
For the future resource consent, that's a goodie. It so happens that we're building Cell 3A under the current consent though, but still to our advantage.
Thanks.
Ross, sorry.
The question that I had, so 4A takes us up, and maybe we're going to come on to this afterwards, takes us up to 2035, does it? 35?
Yeah, Cell 3A would be somewhere around 2035. It all depends on the rate at which stuff comes in.
Yeah. But assuming the current rate. So that, that's 4A, not 3A. 4A, which would come in, so 3A will come into operation.
Yep, 3A would be commencing operation with that initial fluff layer I talked about somewhere around 2027,
Okay.
and then in full operation from 2028. On current demand, we would have something in the order of about 3 to 4 years life in that. That means that we need to start 4A fairly quickly after.
Only 3 to 4 years. So at 80,000 tonnes a year, that's 240,000 tonnes. The capacity is 350. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I mean, I think we'll get into the meat of the questions when we move on to the next bit about where's our future. Have we thought, at the moment, have we thought about and have we done any analysis of reducing our commercial take at the tip to extend the life? And what would that mean for us as a council in terms of revenue or profit?
Firstly, there are ways of doing that. Secondly, we're in a position at the moment where, I'll just take a minute over this. So we are looking at our consent expiry in 2030. We need to get a consent to move forward. Cell 3A would be in full fill mode within the next couple of years. That means that we have a cell capable of about 4 or 5 years capacity, but butting heads against a consent that would run out in 2030. What would not be helpful is if we decided to abandon chasing that consent, but still had several $1 million worth of airspace left hanging. So at the moment, we're just making sure that we've got the right balance of demand coming in, so we're able to fill what we're committing to, but not necessarily looking at slowing down. If we're able to get our consent for the next 5-year period or the next through to 2050, then we would be in full capacity saving mode in order to make it stretch out as long as possible. I'm sorry that's not a clear answer, but through the next slide, I'll demonstrate how we've got a number of different pathways and not sure how we're going to play out yet.
Okay, Izzy, I'll let you go in front of Jeff because you've probably got one.
Yeah, I have. I've only got it. I was like nosy. It was around aftercare as well, because fields 3 and 4 at Norths, it used to be when we'd play up there, we'd get a cut. It would stay infected for ages. So I was wondering, how long does aftercare, what's involved with aftercare, and how long after the cell has been defunct, or whatever you want to call it, whatever the technical term is.
Sure. So aftercare, 30 years.
Oh, wow.
What's involved is we would still continue the monitoring that we do at the moment. So the monitoring is to make sure that nothing that's deep inside the ground is getting into either groundwater, nothing that's on top of the ground is getting round into surface runoff down through Mitchell Stream, that the cover that we would put on top, so when we close it, there's about a half a metre of cover that's clean fill topsoil grass that would go on top. Aftercare would include making sure that that remains intact, because even as it is at the moment, we occasionally get breaks in the cover as the ground moves. The nature of a landfill is that it will slump over time. So as it slumps over time, the other thing we don't want is any ponds building up. So there's a bit of operating to be done even when it's closed.
So for club or any sports club that's using the 3 and 4, if there were more incidents where people were getting cuts and the cuts were taking ages to heal, let's say they're infected because of stuff coming through, is there anything that's provided, is there any way of, fixing it?
There would be if it was shown that there were risks or environmental or directly health-related issues arising from Seavers Grove being used as a playing surface on top, and that's not an uncommon scenario. Seavers Grove was closed in a time when such a thing as aftercare wasn't necessarily undertaken. But as I said before, it is on Greater Wellington's radar for now. We have received a letter asking for information specifically about Seavers Grove landfill.
Jeff?
I'm going to hold all the other questions I've got, which are related to the second part of the presentation, because I assume there's another part around the alternatives.
There's 4 slides to go, yeah. Do you want to wait till the end? Or?
But I only want to ask one question, which is about aftercare, and it is, can just be clear with regards to aftercare, from a fiscal management perspective, that money is coming in through our fees and charges, that's sitting in an account somewhere or some other mechanism for the entirety of the time that the plant is in operation. Is there a pool of money? Because what would worry me is that we will use it as some sort of effective subsidy to ratepayers, and then when we get to the closure point, we go, okay, now we'll just start borrowing down to deal with the aftercare component. So can we just put that issue to rest, potential rest?
So what I'll do, this is where we get into the dark world of rediscounting interest and all that kind of stuff. So I might ask Graham to respond to that question, please.
Thank you.
Graham, can you go up next to, or even up there next to Josh?
Yeah.
Just for the microphone.
I'll let him answer.
Yes, it's part of our financial looking at the landfill. We create a provision for the aftercare provision, and so that's audited every year with the auditors, and we go through this in quite a lot of detail. So we ensure that there's sufficient money in the provision by the time the landfill is closed, that it will then have enough money in that provision to cover the cost of the 30 years which David mentioned. The issue is that if the landfill closed earlier, then we wouldn't have built up the provision enough to cover 30 years. So that's an issue. If the consent runs out early, we wouldn't have built the provision high enough to cover the 30 years. The other issue is with the aftercare provision. It's an accounting provision, but there's no cash behind it.
Excuse me, Mayor. I just want to reinforce the point. We are effectively, with the surplus from the landfill, offsetting rates in terms of having to borrow monies today. So it is an accounting provision.
I'll take this one offline, but I'm just, I'm
Thank you.
perturbed by that. But anyway.
Okay. Kathleen?
Councillor Hayward actually asked my question. So more or
okay.
less, yeah.
That's all right. We'll go to the final 4 slides then. Oh, Ross?
Back to the first slide. Sorry, which talks,
you're not.
which is the the pyramid, the reverse pyramid. What proportion of I need to look at the pyramid
But
again.
it's in the middle of a document, isn't it? I
hierarchy.
don't think they can go back. It's a video thing.
No, the hierarchy. Can you flick to the hierarchy?
Yeah, well, Linda, would you mind going back to slide 1? It'll take me
He
a
has to
few
go
clicks.
out of something. Yeah.
No, they don't. Let's go back. Sorry.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in is what proportion of the total amount of rubbish that would be created ends up in the landfill and how much is taken out at each time? And has that changed over time? Because that's what the whole waste minimisation is all about. And was it? Yeah, the disposal, how much we dispose and how much is taken out.
Yep, so short answer is we don't know. The reason for that is because the only point at which we actually precisely measure how much waste is being created is at the very bottom.
Yeah.
Aside from that, in the middle of the diagram there, we do have recycle, and obviously we measure how much recycling is being picked up, but the massive unknown quantity is we don't know how much is being diverted because we simply don't see it. It may be a lot or it may be a little. Bearing that in mind, we are required to attempt to track that for the purposes of reporting against the Regional Waste Management Minimisation Plan.
Right.
But you've highlighted one of the big data gaps that we're aware of.
Okay, last 4 slides, and I'll have you first up, Jeff, once we're finished.
So just before, can I?
Yep, you go.
Just before Maria speaks, I just want to point out that this assessment that we have done on waste alternatives is very much part of a resource management consenting process, RMA consenting process. We haven't tried to solve the whole world's issues with waste. This is very much contained within the RMA and where we're going to go with respect to this landfill, because as part of reconsenting this landfill, we have to look at what the alternatives might be. So we've very much restricted it to that and not gone beyond that. So that's important context for what Maria's about to tell you. Thanks, Maria.
You'll need a speaker, Maria. Grab the one from
It's okay.
Kathleen.
I'll do the talking. I particularly wanted Maria here to answer any difficult questions that I wasn't sure of, as she's written the report. So when we commenced the resource consent work in 2020, one of the things that we had to do was come up with something called an alternatives assessment, and that was basically to say if we're determined to have a landfill at Spicer, we looked at everything else and these were the alternatives we had. About a year ago, we started doing this in a great deal more detail as it became clear to us that the consent we were seeking initially was probably not going to happen. So we transformed from providing the consent application with the alternatives to something which would inform more directly what our future might be after we do actually closed. And again, the issue we've got there, which is we are running out of capacity, and the current consent ends in 2030. So we've started doing work to prepare an application for a resource consent. At the present time, we could be looking at a consent to take a new consent to take us through to 2035. Council currently is committed via the long-term plan to a consent till 2050. As I said, we've spoken to senior management as outlined in Maria's report a little while ago and said we're not confident of that. We may elect to not have a landfill at all, or we may elect to keep the space but use it as a Class 2 landfill. Now that's briefly mentioned in the report, but I just want to take a second over that. The report was written for the purposes of reconsenting Spicer as a Class 1. One of the emerging options as the report was being written was that if we closed as a Class 1 in 2030, we still have considerable potential space in the valley that could be used as a Class 2. I mentioned clean fill earlier on. Clean fill would be a Class 2 material. There's also certain waste streams, construction and demolition waste streams that are not harmful, not toxic, don't create the level of greenhouse gas emissions that Class 1 waste does. So there is an option here to be able to hold the site open as a Class 2. That would mean we could effectively still be able to run something that has some revenue coming in, use up the space, but not use it for the nasty stuff that Class 1 is. You're welcome. The alternatives assessment, we considered anything that we thought might be viable. That's an incineration facility in Denmark that so happens to have grass ski slope built on top of it. We got effectively 3 alternatives floated to the top of what was our criteria, which were best for the environment, best in order to be able to provide the service, and most financially viable. The 2 pictures there are one of the first option, which is something called mechanical biological treatment, or MBT, and that is basically like diversion from the landfill put into overdrive. So anything that comes in, anything mechanical or clean demolition type material is separated out via some sort of facility as on the left. Anything that's organic is separated out and then taken off to a different facility. The next option is to continue to hold a landfill. As I've just said, it may not be a Class 1 landfill, it may be a Class 2. If it's a Class 1 landfill, that means that certain waste streams need to go somewhere else, and so the third option was export. That's a large refuse transfer station, so if we were to close and export waste, we would need obviously a very much bigger transfer station than what we have at the moment.
Export to elsewhere in New Zealand.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so
Could you say, one of you say that into the speaker?
certainly, yes. Export, when I say export, I mean out of the district. Out of the district, most likely at the moment out of the region altogether. So we've been running a bit of a process which is, and I referred to the options before, we have a number of alternatives in front of us as a sort of a future pathway ahead. If we're looking from the point from 2030 onwards in which our current consent expires, we're currently committed to, through the LTP, to hold the landfill open until 2050. When that closes in 2050, if we're able to hold it open that long, the valley itself will have reached its capacity. It's irrespective of what else we could build there or what else we could consent, it's just full. So everything would need to be transported out of the district or indeed out of the region. The second pathway we've got is we seek another consent, but only for another 5 years through to 2035. The point of that would be to make sure that we've got a decent amount of time in which to sort out the alternative from that point onwards, bearing in mind that a new landfill altogether can be a considerable consenting challenge and might take 10 years to achieve, even if we could achieve it somewhere in the region. So from 2035 onwards, again, we would be exporting, or we may be exporting but holding a Class 2 landfill open as well. Our third pathway forward is we simply stop in 2030 and we export everything, or we stop in 2030 and we combination of export versus Class 2. If we look at those 3 critical factors outlined in the assessment report of environmental acceptability, financial acceptability, and providing service, on balance at the moment, the best pathway forward we have is to seek another 5 years. That would give us full use of Cell 3A and then potentially Cell 4, and then look to exporting that stuff which we can't hold in a Class 2, but opening a Class 2 on the same site, which would be a very much simpler consent, not bringing in the same level of revenue, but would be a cheaper landfill to run. So recommendations that we've put forward to senior management so far, we've said 2 phases required here. Phase 1 is to pick one of those pathways and head to it, and the pathway which we would be recommending we pick is that we seek consent from 2030 to 2035 and keep filling as we can till then. And then phase 2. Phase 2 would be then we export, hold a Class 2 facility open, but there would need to be a regional collaboration in order to be able to establish a landfill site somewhere in the region if we can. So that would be a phase 2. Phase 2 planning would need to start pretty much straight away. But there is an or. And the or is phase 1, hold open until 2035, and then perhaps export from 2035 onwards.
Mayor, guys, we're really clear, these are not recommendations to you today. We would not do that. These are recommendations that we are dealing with internally.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, so our recommendations for the senior management. So the next steps in respect of, just going back one, that diagram there where I've set out a few pathways forward and one which we think provides the best response to those 3 basic criteria in the assessment report. The next steps we've got are to check through the feasibility on those and then potentially come to council seeking a decision, but that won't be for some time yet. We still have a bit of work to do to determine some of the feasibility of each of those pathways, but make sure we've got the right one. I think at that stage...
That's it?
Yeah.
Right, we've got Jeff, then Josh. I'll put you on the list.
Clarification, because it may come in with it.
Okay. What?
The point of clarification is, I'm asking, at 2035, how does that give us an option for a Class 2? Because we will have gone to cell 4A and filled it by 2035, isn't that right? So therefore there would be some more development costs in order to open another cell that would be Class 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So if you look at the current LTP, it's only for a 10-year period. When we roll out the next 20 years, there's still further capital expenditure proposed. That would be for the clean fill site.
Jeff.
Maria, David, Mike, thanks for bringing this to our attention. It is sobering reading. I have questions that I think this is a workshop, it's not a decision maker, but I just want to get some questions. Point 38 of the workshop notes talks about Te Rurunga o Tō Rangatira provided the results of their own internal assessment. I noted that it is not covered in the documents that were provided to us for this workshop. Can we see a copy of that documentation, please?
Yeah, we're happy to make that public. We've actually already checked with Ngāti Toa and they're okay with that, so we can add that.
Okay, so I'm gonna hold particular judgment on some of these issues until I've seen that report from Ngāti Toa, but I just foreshadowed that to begin with. With regards to existing hardware that we have purchased for things such as construction and demolition waste diversion, how does that factor into the feasibility work that is now being that is contemplated by officers?
Yeah, so the purchase of the C&D equipment and the operation of that through lease to a private company would factor into the demand that we would be projecting coming into the landfill. So if the operation is successful, we know that we've got another diversion of material away.
So if I've understood your question correctly, it's in effect a parallel stream of work that may enhance the strength of any resource consent we've put in place because of the mitigating measures that we are taking in alignment with the application.
That's a fair comment. However, the consenting issues are not related to construction and demolition waste.
True. Noting that Phase 2 in particular talks about the potential of a regional approach with regards to MBT, where are we with our likely partner councils, Wellington City and Hutt City? How are they responsive to this time frame?
We have presentation and report to the Wellington Region Waste Management Joint Committee meeting on, I think, December 6th. And in that report, we're setting out the regional, not just Hutt, Wellington and ourselves, but the regional priorities and time frame for each of the regional actions in that current plan. One of those regional actions, which we've very deliberately brought up in priority, is can we get our heads together and look at the long-term future of disposal within the region? So we'll be talking to the committee about that in December.
I appreciate you bringing up that committee. So I'm looking forward to hearing that in terms of the deliberations. The current plan covers till 2029, and there are specific commitments in terms of reducing the overall waste per capita across the region. In our feasibility work, are we talking about an option that allows us to maintain those commitments already made as part of that regional plan?
That commitment in terms of reduction of waste per capita would have to be factored into the demand projections that would be considered with feasibility.
Very careful whakautu there. Well done. Point 50. I also agree that there are no ideal options, but doesn't the alternative assessment already confirm what we probably knew already, which is to say that it is likely that we would have to deal with, if we continue to run a landfill as we currently do, there would have to be some form of a soft landing in terms of eventual shutdown of a landfill, whether that's to a class 2 or just shut down generally, and that also that we were going to have to rely upon regional assistance in terms of getting the economies of scale, whether that's in the private sector or elsewhere, to deal with the waste that we are producing as a region collectively. This doesn't change that. That doesn't change any of that, does it?
Councillor, can I just get you to clarify when you said soft landing? Can you just expand on that for me?
I'm using the phrase soft landing so as to say that because I have a reluctance around shutting down landfills, in so much that in the same way that Wellington City a few years ago discussed this very same issue, what I foresaw would be inevitably that they would send their waste to some other location, probably us, and that doesn't really solve the problem. It just diverts it to some other region to let them deal with it. And I'm sure we've all seen that wonderful Simpsons episode where they actually just said, why don't somebody else deal with it? That's what we're playing out right now. That was satire. This feels like reality.
I understand the point there. So one of the things we do have an advantage within the region here, and Mike mentioned, not a lot of councils actually own their own landfill. We're in the unusual position in Wellington that 3 of us do. We are also very aware that if Spicer were to close completely in, say, 2030, and all of our waste gets shunted to Silverstream or Southern, one of those would be the next to fall over, and not long after. So the advantage with being able to work under a regional umbrella is to make sure that we're not going to trip over each other's feet, and be able to plan for the future of the region waste disposal in sync.
Can I just add to that? It very much depends how you define the problem. So for me, what we're dealing with here is the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff after waste has been generated. We don't make the stuff in the first place, right? But yet, by quirks of legislation and owning a landfill, we are downstream from all the stuff that's being generated. In terms of changing people's behaviour and getting the top of the waste hierarchy, we as a society are miles away from that kind of stuff. So until we attack it from the top of the pipe, we're always going to be left with dealing with the dregs at the bottom. So I think we're a long way away from getting to the nirvana of the waste minimisation hierarchy.
I concur with that rationale as well. I know that we will require Parliament to continue to be aggressive on these issues. I had hoped that, for the most part, the central government would continue the pathway that they had under the previous administration. For some things, they certainly have. Likewise, there will be consumer choices and changes, and also operators and producers who will make their changes as well. That's part of the mix as well. But ultimately, we as a council will have to lead locally and with our partner councils regionally. We just need that local. We need to be demonstrating that we are leading locally with our partner councils in terms of a regional solution, and continue to do so, be seen to be doing so in alignment with our solid waste minimisation regional reduction plan. Yeah, I think that's me. I'm going to hold off any other comments because I just want to see the Ngāti Toa plan, and I know this is going to come back to council at some point in the future. And obviously, this is also going to be some taki that the joint landfill and waste minimisation, waste treatment plant committee is going to have to also wrestle with as well. Kia ora.
Going to be interesting. I'm not comfortable shipping rubbish from here somewhere else. But anyway, Josh.
There was one last question. Sorry, I apologise.
Josh. Yeah.
Does any of this also complicate or compromise the timeframes around household collection changes, particularly around organic waste, because, again, of the need to create higher levels of diversion from the waste hierarchy?
No, the proposed curbside change actually plays quite nicely into the general timeline here.
The council changes it. Josh.
That was one of my questions, actually. There you go. On this issue of potentially exporting out of the district, from removing the cost considerations to a side, if we're just thinking about how significant this issue is regionally and nationally, landfill capacity, generally speaking, to what degree would us exporting, financial implications aside, just be making that problem worse somewhere else that's just going to bubble up? Because it seems like if the entire region, if we're just shipping everything out of our region, that's got to go somewhere, and surely they're short on capacity too.
Yes, so the likely, if we talk about export out the district for a start rather than the region, the likely destination would be the Bonnie Glen landfill in Martin. Part of the consideration around feasibility would be to keep an eye on the future capacity of that one. When I showed the slide before that had the complaints about Dome Valley in Auckland, it's what they call a mega landfill. We don't have a significant amount here. It sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's one of the smaller ones. But the point taken is, in the feasibility, we would obviously be checking through with Bonnie Glen, for example, on what their long-term capacity would be. But heading back to Mike's point, at some stage, yes, we're going to use up regional capacity, national capacity, and there is going to have to be a shift towards the top end of that hierarchy.
And further to that, so let's say hypothetically we're shipping stuff out to Martin. The cost from an emissions perspective, but presumably chucking everything on
Electric trucks.
And sending them up, that's going to have some sort of emissions impact, which presumably we would be footing the bill for under the ETS.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have an idea of the degree to which that would be a significant extra expense?
The ETS charges on the waste that we would be exporting to Bonnie Glen fall under the liability of the Bonnie Glen owner, which obviously will be transferred through to us as a cost. With respect to the transport, I don't believe there's any liability over emissions from transport at the moment, but just to say there is a rail line that could also be used. But we would be factoring in, as we expect to do with the curbside change, for example, what the carbon footprint implications would be.
Okay. But there's likely to be some costs somewhere that somehow will work their way back to residents. Yeah. Okay. Given the fact that and sorry, specifically on this issue of nationwide capacity, do you have any commentary around how are things looking nationwide from a landfill capacity perspective? Does central government have a perspective on this? And has there been any indication if there are particular issues around enabling capacity nationwide, that central government would in any circumstance come to the table, either from an enablement perspective or a funding perspective?
Mike?
So under this government, no, we have seen no desire to move this COPUP along. What I would say, Councillor, is that in New Zealand, our problem, if you like, is we have an abundance of cheap land. So whilst we moan about $250 a tonne, actually it's relatively cheap if you look around the world, and it's still worthwhile people investing in landfills because they're going to make a tonne of money off them. So while we have that macroeconomic picture, it makes no sense economically to do anything other than what we're currently doing. Now, the theory is that as the cost of waste increases because of the cost of the ETS, the cost of the waste levy, and the cost of transporting it, then other things will become more cost competitive, like some of the technology that David flicked up. So again, price sensitive. So if it's costing us $1,000 a tonne to truck stuff up to Martin, then all of a sudden us building an MBT plant becomes more attractive. So that's the theory, but I still think we're at least a decade away from reaching any of those nexus. That nexus where those things tip over into being more cost effective. But I have to say, us as one of 7 TAs, it won't work on a TA level, it has to work on at least a regional level, and I suspect for New Zealand, probably a national level. So coming back to your original point, it would be great if we thought about this nationally rather than piecemeal in the way that we are at the moment.
Yeah. And so if we end up in a situation where, if we're shipping stuff up to Martin, probably Wellington, Hutt City, Upper Hutt is looking at something similar.
Mm-hmm.
So how much of a band-aid is that? Like if we move to saying, yep, we're going to ship stuff off to Martin, does that buy us another 20 years or is that another 5 years?
I don't know the answer to that. We haven't done, we do projections on our
Yeah.
landfill here. We haven't necessarily combined them with the other two landfill owning councils yet.
Yeah.
I'm also not sure if it's a band-aid or whether it's a viable long-term solution, but that would be another consideration to play out.
Okay. I had a point here that I wrote down as a clarification. I think it's a question, not a point of clarification. Is that the main issue in terms of feasibility around achieving a consent, is it just whether or not a consent is possible in any circumstance, or is it the consent would be so expensive that it wouldn't be financially viable?
The issue for us, and as I mentioned, consenting landfills is becoming extremely difficult in New Zealand. Consenting our landfill is especially difficult because of that very immediate and even current history. We had about 20 IDA complaints last week. So that compounds the difficulty for us particularly. With regards to the cost of consenting, we do have a budget for the resource consent. It's sitting somewhere just north of $4 million. There would be a point at which we would say we're not going to realise the value out of doing this, and therefore we would scale ourselves back.
Okay, cool. That's helpful. Thank you. My next question's already been addressed. Financial implications of exporting, recognising that you wouldn't have modelled this out and you may not be able to answer this now, but I guess the things that I'm thinking about and would be useful to know is it's presumably more expensive for the average household to be in a situation where your rubbish is being exported as opposed to being dealt with locally. Do you have a rough idea of to what degree? Like, are we talking it's going to double the cost for everyone? Is it going to be a more marginal cost? What sort of ballpark are we working in?
Sure. So a couple of years ago, we did a little bit of work on what would be the comparative costs at other centres where there is a major transfer station that exports everything out to another region. So New Plymouth, for example, exporting all of its material out. At the moment, your cost per tonne is 228 plus GST. If we were to build a very large RTS here and export everything out, don't quote me, we'd probably be looking somewhere in the order of between 350 and 400 per tonne.
Okay,
so in the order of maybe getting close to double, maybe.
Okay, cool. That's very helpful. And further to that, given those cost implications, if we proceed with the proposal we looked at under the long-term plan of having council-funded bins, have we mapped out or modelled what the potential financial impact on council is going to be to go from being in a situation where we are currently generating a revenue from our landfill to not only are we not generating a revenue, but we are paying out of the general ratepayer pool the cost of exporting, say, to Martin?
Those two activities are separately funded. So the curbside activity is a specifically funded targeted rate activity. With regards to the landfill, in a simplistic way, when you pay to bring stuff into the landfill, what you are paying for is to run the landfill in a very simplistic manner. But the curbside service is a separate fund altogether. There would be some influence or some impact, but not in the way in which you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my last question was the barrier to a Denmark-style furnace plus ski field. Well, I was thinking furnace plus maybe bike track adventure park, potentially. Yeah, kill a couple birds with one stone. The barrier to something like that, is that purely like a financial, it just isn't viable, or are there legal barriers to something like that in New Zealand?
Yeah, there's a number of barriers to that type of treatment to be used here. One is consentability. The air discharge consent would be a nightmare to try and obtain. Energy cost would be a barrier. Probably in terms of principle, and we talk about the waste hierarchy, and I've said that final point of disposal is the bottom end where we've got nothing else that we can do. One of the issues with that type of technology is that it requires a lot of waste to run it. It's what we call feeding the monster, and it's the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that there's a strict legal barrier, it's just not viable. Okay, That's all my questions for now.
And we
Thank
may
you.
choose to look at bins again because of the cost. And the cost of consenting at $4 million is just ridiculous. Kathleen.
I'm hoping you can clarify
list,
this.
is
I
that
don't
what
know
you're
if you have already said and I missed it. But with regards to the transfer, what did you call it? The transfer station. So currently, when rubbish is collected, it's contractors, right, that go through the waste station and dump the rubbish. And if residents want to tip their trailer, they come through and directly use the landfill. So with a transfer station, if we're not going to have a landfill, I'm just trying to understand what, in my mind, I was thinking, well, those contracting trucks will just go to the closest landfill. And are you saying the intention of the transfer station is to collect the rubbish there, including residents' rubbish, and that all gets shipped off somewhere else?
Yep, I can clarify that. So we have the landfill, and then we've got a very small refuse transfer station. So if you're bringing in your trailer from the weekend, you'll go to that little transfer station, and then the landfill operator picks it up and takes it to the landfill. In the scenario where we're talking about exporting everything outside, we would probably still have a refuse transfer station. That would be for the likes of the smaller loads, residential loads. So it would be a bigger one than we've got at the moment. It would presumably be available to commercial collectors. However, it's still only a temporary point where someone will then take it to a landfill somewhere else. There would be commercial companies who wouldn't necessarily go there. They might do their run in Plymouth and go straight up to the Bonnie Glen landfill, for example. The manner in which this works in Canterbury is a number of towns have transfer stations where it's full drop off, and then there is a carting company that takes everything from there off site.
So is it more about the convenience then?
Correct. It's about making sure that for those small trailer loads, boot loads, whatever, you've still got somewhere you can take it.
So further to Councillor Trillin's point around if we had bins that were collected by council in the future, would those be taken to this transfer station as well, most likely, or would
It may
off?
depend on the company that's doing it. So let's say, for argument's sake, the company that was doing our curbside pickup service might find it more economical to simply go straight to the landfill, even though it might be a few hours' drive away.
Thank you. In terms of feasibility for a transfer station, as a council, what does that look like?
So that would be down to the basic criteria that we've already used through the assessment would be, is it environmentally acceptable, is it providing a service, and is it providing a cost-effective service, and just trying to rank everything up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that wouldn't be rate funded then, would it? It would be, or would it?
The funding may be part of a feasibility decision. At the moment, for example, when you take your load to the transfer station we have today, it is not rate funded. You're paying for it yourself when you go through the gate.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Ross?
The implications of this are damn frightening for Porirua. Given, for the councillors who have been around the table for a while, I was looking at keeping the landfill open to 2050. I understand the implications of getting resource consent, etc. So it is going to be necessary in order for us to make a decision to have a look at the financial implications for ratepayers, because it just seems to me that we're looking at something which has been a source of revenue for Porirua City Council to become a cost centre, potentially. And, that has got to be worrying for all of us. So as far as I'm concerned, the question that I have is, would consenting to 2035 be made easier by the under scenario 2? In other words, we're seeking consent, but the landfill as a class 1 will close after that period. Would that consenting be made easier theoretically under that scenario?
Sorry, can I just clarify, consenting through till 2035?
Yep.
Versus consenting through to 2050?
Well, no, versus closing the landfill.
Yep, closing the landfill outright does still require a consent. It's a closed landfill consent, but it would be
it's not
very
the
much
same
easier
as-
than establishing consent to keep operating.
Yeah.
He's talking about cost to the ratepayer, though, is what he's saying. What's the best way to go? That's probably too hard. You can come back.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it needs those feasibility studies in order to be able to do that, because I just don't feel that we have enough information at the moment. I mean, it looks like scenario 2 is a reasonable thing to do, but I don't, in terms of the impacts on, or potential impacts of the various scenarios on ratepayers, then we're in the dark, basically.
If I may, the reason for this particular presentation was we've been working through a process of getting a consent in accordance with the LTP commitment, and earlier in the year we came to a crunch point and had to take a bitter pill to senior management and say we don't think this is possible. So what we wanted to do today is just say we've got a situation unfolding in front of us, we have a lot more work to do, but just for your early heads up, it's not going to look the way you thought it was going to be.
Oh, no, I absolutely,
We appreciate
we appreciate that. I absolutely commend you for it. I think it's been, pretty clear, but, the implications are frightening for all of us as ratepayers and others. But, that's great, but there's quite a bit more work to do. Yeah, so, thank you for the heads up. It has been really useful.
Okay, thank you very much, team. That was awesome. We are about to finish that one and we will be going offline. Thank you.